Okay, let's look at Flashpoint Golan from the point of view of sort of a final review. This is a hard game to talk about because, as I said at the beginning, I respect this thing a lot more than I enjoy it. It has a fairly high rating over on Board Game Geek. And I kind of would have expected to see comments that reflected that same kind of view. But a lot of the comments seem to indicate people who really do enjoy playing this on the higher end of the ratings. That's strange because I find this game comes to almost the unplayable level. Not so much the mechanisms. You can get used to them, and, you know, knowing people who play the Fleet series or some of the other Victory games, the Gulf Strike, you can kind of get this feel that, you know, there's something, there's definitely a crowd out there that does enjoy these very detailed, harder to play, harder to, at least for me, harder to grasp, more modern simulations. And that's fine, you know. I mean, I really appreciate that, and that's what drew it to me, or drew me to it, was this idea of, I really want to get into that, and I really want to see that kind of thing. But when it came down to the actual playing, it was just too much for me for this kind of level of interest. Largely because there's a strong reactive nature to the game no matter what. You know, I open things up, maybe I fire some artillery, then you respond at my artillery with your own artillery or an airstrike. Well, if it's an airstrike, we're done. But conceivably, we could just end up running down the line, firing artillery all at the beginning of this turn. That doesn't necessarily have to happen, though. And as we saw, you know, it's not like Terrible Swift Sword with sort of a pre-fire artillery, counter-battery type fire that takes place at the beginning of every turn and kind of determines the flow. Well, the attacker gets that, and then the defender can fire back during his defensive fire, if he so desires. But anyway, that's a different game. For this, though, that level of play and the level of thinking that's involved in it is a strong barrier for me. The other thing is the rulebook itself. The rulebook itself is not very good, and at times I'm wondering if it's even complete enough to play the game, but, you know, I'm willing to just kind of put that aside and do it, right? And maybe play it wrong, and in fact at times even decide that I'm intentionally playing it wrong, as I did with the breakthroughs. I don't want to deal with those suckers. But there were other things I basically ignored. I ignored the special munitions. Another question with it is balance. So the Israelis have a humongous advantage, and in the scenario we saw, the big one that we saw, and the others too to some extent, that advantage kind of plays through, and it's tough to see how the Arabs could have won, especially the big scenario. But that was a particularly, first of all, that's generated by the random scenario generator, and they all use the same victory conditions, more or less. You know, you might have goals against Jordan that you wouldn't have in the game that I played because Jordan wasn't in it. But I was facing one major enemy out of Syria and Jordan. I was only facing Syria. And I had full U.S. support, no possibility of a UN resolution ending the game. So it was pretty much a hopeless situation. Under those terms, I don't think it's unreasonable to say Israel is going to win. You know, the Arab hope in that kind of scenario is that there's a UN resolution calling for a ceasefire and that Israel abides by it. Or doesn't, and loses so much credibility in the world that that's actually sort of an Arab victory as well. But with the U.S. backing them, there's no way there's going to be a resolution. So you pretty much turn on who's got the better troops and who's got the mostest stuff and who wins the air war. Well, the air war is slanted towards Israel no matter what. Throw the U.S. in it and bang, you know, it's over, right? and that's what happened. So the random scenario generation system can generate some very, very unbalanced scenarios. My question is, can it generate some balanced scenarios? I think it can, but this is my first time using it. I've played the campaign games before, which are smaller and probably not as interesting. What about components? Well, I've already kind of talked about the rule books. This is surprising because Victory Games is usually very good with their rules. This one has a sparseness that goes beyond what they usually cover. Probably trying to get it to a smaller set of rule books. I usually like sparseness, and I feel like I can come up with a playable game out of this, but I'm never sure if I'm playing the game that Mark Herman intended me to be playing. In particular with, hey, can I fire the artillery more or less when I want, or only as a strike at the beginning of a set-piece battle? Does it have to be at a battle? What's going on with all this? None of that's really very clearly expressed. There is a playthrough, though, or at least an example of play, which maybe if I read that, you know, that's an extra... Geez, I can't see, my eyes are so bad now. That's an extra 8 pages of rules or of text that, you know, I just put that off because to me, the rules are what I intend. And I almost always walk away from playthroughs and say, I don't have time for that. Because if they contradict what I believe about the rules from reading the rules, I'm very disturbed there anyhow. You get player aid cards for each player, and as you can see, there wasn't enough information on the map and the player aid cards for me to be able to assess everything that I needed. And I even, there are other charts that I would have put on here that I did not put on here. You have a little pad, which really, for the smaller scenarios is sufficient. You need 2 sheets for the larger one like I did, to keep track of the current quality of all the troops. That's a very clever mechanism, and hopefully I'll remember to talk about that. The map itself is beautiful. There's no question. The color work, I think this is a Kibler design. I'm not sure. I can't remember. It looks like his kind of coloration and style, and I remember he was in here as some kind of graphics director, but I don't know if he did the map itself. But it's very, very pretty. It's got a lot of information on it. Victory Games tended to put a lot of information on map that was useful. You know, maybe better to put it on a player aid card, but in the interest of space and cost, it makes sense to put it on the map where anybody can see it. The only problem I have, and this is pure Victory Games, all the counters have the same issue. It's a nice map, it's heavy quality, but that heavy quality makes it pooch too much. And I don't like plexiglass. If you like plexiglass, you probably don't need such a heavy map. And if you don't like plexiglass, this map is probably somewhat annoying. I've heard some people say they're able to get these things to lie flat. I have never been able to get Victory Games maps to lie completely flat. And that's actually what's ended my game, is I had a pooch issue. And actually, I think I had slickery counters, these gloss counters. I picked up a big stack. You saw the size of the stacks in my playthrough. That may be partly my fault for putting morale levels on every single unit. And it just squirted out. And with the annoying music playing in the background, which is luckily gone by now because I'd have to close the window or else not be able to think. Okay, so what do we have that's kind of neat here? Each headquarters has its own like series of actions you can take, and one of these, jamming, I'm not sure that I understand the rules completely on that, right? I started out with, hey, each eligible headquarters can do 1 jamming attack, but I'm not at the beginning of the turn, and that's it. I'm not sure that's the intention, whether or not they should be able to take a reaction, but I saw no reaction that allowed jamming. So that wouldn't really matter. And essentially you spend capabilities off the headquarters to be able to undertake certain actions. Some of them I just didn't use, like minefields. I didn't bother with them. Not in a special action, but I didn't worry about the special munitions, which would have aided the Israelis more and the U.S. more than the Arabs. The actual combat chart is kind of interesting. It reminds me a little bit of Desert Fox's combat chart with different terrain types and different levels of odds per terrain type. So you don't just have shifts for terrain, although you could do that. You know, this is just an odd representational issue. But the actual results are morale checks, and you check that against the current tactical quality of the unit. And that goes down if the unit does poorly enough, or goes up if they do well enough. And that'll just indicate levels of loss. And you might actually be able to do more than one level of loss in an attack. I found the combat system really kind of cool. You know, this is the kind of cool stuff that I loved victory games for. Is I'd look it up, and this combat chart, like the old SPI Desert Fox combat chart, I would say, oh, that's so neat. I don't know how I feel about it now as I'm older. Maybe that neatness factor is kind of worn off a little bit, but I like what it represents better than your regular CRT. I also like that it's very random. Some people are going to dislike this game because you can go into what looks like an overwhelming attack and lose badly. Well, if it's really overwhelming, if you have high morale, yes, you could get knocked down a morale level and you could fail to make the advance you want to. But it's not like an attacker eliminated or something like that. Your force is still there. It might end up failing completely after that hit if the person you were attacking has sufficient resources to just bomb it into crap afterwards, because it may be in a vulnerable position after that. What else really struck me in this? Obviously, the scenario generation system, that's an interesting thing that a lot of the victory games put into play. I never explore them enough. And I feel like with this game, you almost want to tailor. You don't want to just randomly generate a scenario if you want something that's going to be kind of balanced. You kind of want to tailor it between the two players. And you might be able to use some kind of bidding mechanism to help do that. I'm not sure how. You'd have to assign points. The actual chit pull mechanism to the game. Now, some people really don't like that in a game like this. I actually feel like it makes more sense to me in an operational design than it does in a tactical game. And I've kind of reconciled whatever disagreements I have with it in a tactical game. So I'm pretty happy with it. It allows you to represent kind of those breakthrough moments and everything without having extra rules for that, which is one of the reasons that I kind of discarded the breakthrough rules in this game. I didn't feel like they really added anything. They give you a movement bonus. You can push your troops a little further through it. I allowed it to work during the one activation that it was created, but not for additional units, because that just caused too much of a pain in the ass mechanically coping with it on the board. So most of the game is just tightly in that one activation per division situation. What that means is that divisions can't coordinate very well. Now you have defensive coordination, especially between divisions with the Israelis, but you have no offensive coordination. I feel like that's something that's missing in the game. The only thing you have is I can position units around your flank or rear, and then I degrade your morale, even if they're from a different formation, the units that I put there. But I don't have any real ability to coordinate an attack. And that feels like it's something that's just kind of missing from the game. Anyway, what's my overall? My overall is that the rules, at least my perceived view, that they're ambiguous and somewhat incomplete. And the level of mechanical complexity to this game, in terms of all the counters, activating a unit, having to find it on the board and everything, just made it too much of a pain in the ass to really enjoy the way I'd like it to. I think the core of it is a pretty damn good simulation, much better than anything else I've seen, of an operational modern war at this level. But I'm not sure I want that enough. Well, I'm pretty sure I don't want that enough to be able to put up with it. So to me, it's almost an unplayable game just because of the barrier. I had to play a few scenarios, really two little scenarios to kind of remember how things work basically, and then about half the big scenario before I decided, yeah, that's how I'm going to handle artillery. I think that's what they mean. Or at least I think that's how I should handle my units. Is that a terrible thing? No. Musket and pike, it took me a while to kind of get a grasp on how to use my units correctly. And I feel like I'm in the same kind of position with this. That if I play this a couple more times, I'll have a pretty good idea how to handle the units correctly and be able to give a better view on maybe the accuracy of the simulation itself. Although my knowledge is certainly less than a lot of people's on everything, really, but certainly on this this time period in the wars. But I don't feel like I have a real grasp on what I should be doing and what I shouldn't. So, for example, that idea that maybe coordinated attacks don't work, maybe I'll get some insight into how that flanking kind of makes some sense, even though those units can't take any losses or anything. How that kind of works within the framework that I'm trying to view the game in. Anyway, I hope you've been able to see enough, especially with the playthrough, to kind of get an idea of whether or not you'd like this game. I know I don't like it much at all, but as I said, I respect it more than I like it. So I can see where other people would. And a lot of the victory games fall in that position for me. The fleet games, I collect them because I do respect them a lot. The Gulf Strike and Aegean Strike I've picked up. Again, I have that same kind of feeling. But this one seems to push it to the limit for me in terms of... it's not just that it's not much fun, although I was beginning to enjoy it at points. There's no question there. Somehow, I think I've become more amiable towards games and less willing to just say, well, I don't like this, and put it aside for 10 years. All right, let's end it up.